We look at the biggest breakout candidates for the Baltimore Ravens over the second half of their 2022 season coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we've returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, or part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today, making us your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube. And if you hear this on YouTube, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a ton. Also, in audio form, be sure to follow along Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We are there for you. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, as we covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts, and we're back. It is Wednesday, and that means midweek edition. We're going to continue our Ravens coverage here. The Ravens play the Panthers in Week 11. They're a 6-3 football team coming off of their bye, so second half of the season mode is activated for them. And today we're going to be diving into some breakout candidates. We're going to dive right into it. We're going to talk about offensive breakout candidates in the first segment, defense in the second segment, and dive into some mailbag questions in the final segment, talking about how the Ravens can continue their momentum, Justin Houston, and a lot more there. So I'm excited for this one. Let's just dive right into it now. Baltimore has a lot of players you can consider breakout candidates, I guess, and it's not just limited. I'm not going to limit it to offensive, like first-year guys or defensive second-year guys. It'll be all over the place. Guys might have 1 year of experience. Guys might have 4 years. So the first guy, or I guess we'll group these guys together in the offensive category, might be a little bit controversial, but I'll explain my reasoning. Running backs J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Now, both these guys have Dobbins 1 year's rookie season in 2020, but Edwards a very successful track record here, over 5 yards a carry in his first 3 seasons, with he had a massive workload. It wasn't like he had 40 carries. He had a lot of carries in those first 3 seasons, and this year he's already off to that 4.9 yards per carry here. But for Dobbins, everybody's been waiting on that second year, third year breakout for him, where, look, in 2020, he led all running backs in yards per carry. He averaged 6.0 yards per carry. This is a player that entering 2021, so many people, myself included, we're like, this guy's going to break out. He's going to be one of the studs of this 2020 draft class, the running back group. And instead, we kind of saw Jonathan Taylor's ascension and a couple of those other guys in the class, but Dobbins obviously missed the year with the torn ACL. So this is more about Dobbins than it is about Edwards. To name Edwards as a breakout candidate, I don't think it's necessarily, I don't want to say fair, but look, he's already proven himself. He has 3 straight seasons, and now he's in his 4th year here of averaging either right at or above 5 yards a carry. So that's a guy that's proven himself. For Dobbins, he proved himself a little bit during his rookie season, but I think breakout-wise, whenever he's able to get back on the field, we started to see him ease his way. Well, not necessarily ease, but just get back into the swing of things on the field. So I think that he is a player that when you look ahead to the second half of the season, whenever he's able to get back on the field for them, again, it'll be more easing in and getting him acclimated and everything. But once he is back and fully confident, fully healthy and whatnot, this is a player I think that could have a very, very big second half of the season. I think Edwards can have a big second half of the season too, but I think when you're talking about like the title of a breakout candidate, I think that applies more to Dobbins in this case than it does to Edwards. But what I'm saying with both is I just expect both to have a very successful second half of the season, especially going behind that Ravens offensive line that has played so well this whole entire season. Been so impressed with them. So Dobbins and Edwards, my first 2 picks, but again, more Dobbins than Edwards. Well, let's talk wide receivers now, and what a controversial position we have at the wide receiver room here, where, again, just a quick summary, Baltimore does not bring in a veteran during the offseason outside of Demarcus Robinson. I have been pretty consistent in saying that I wish they had done something more there. I think there were a couple of options you could have added if you're Baltimore. Then at the trade deadline, they did not add a wide receiver. I was adamant that, yeah, they probably should have done something there, but they bring in Deshaun Jackson. They have Andy Isabella on the practice squad, but they have doubled and tripled and whatever you want to say down on the young guys. And Devin Duvernay stepped up, but Outside of that, we've seen some flashes from Rashad Bateman, but he's done for the season now. So I'm going to say it. James Prochet. James Prochet is one of my breakout candidates here. And I know there's been a lot of, I don't even want to call it controversy, but I think, a lot of mixed opinions surrounding James Prochet. Obviously, has not necessarily lived up to the billing this year or in his first 2+ seasons. This year for Baltimore, I think he was expected by a lot of people to take on a pretty big role for them, but he has played in 7 games this year, only 8 targets, 6 receptions for 53 yards, only averaging 8.8 yards per catch. He's a player that has a lot of potential, and T. Martin kind of talked about, well, what does James Prochet have to do to get involved in the offense a little more? And he talked about how it's hard to get him on the field in some circumstances because he's behind Devin Duvernay in certain packages, and Devin Duvernay doesn't want to come off the field, and obviously Duvernay is playing very well right now. And T. Martin kind of said, look, it's not an indictment on Prochet. It's just the way that the guys have been playing recently. But the Ravens, with Bateman down, I don't necessarily trust Deshaun Jackson to stay healthy for an entire season based off injury history. Tylan Wallace has been a healthy scratch in some of these games. So you have Duvernay producing. The Ravens need someone else. And I will admit, look, this is not an offense that necessarily runs through their wide receivers. This is a run-heavy offense with the tight ends being the primary option in the passing game. But I still think you need someone in the wide receiver room outside of Devin Duvernay to step up. I think DeMarcus Robinson has been okay. I think he's had some moments, but I think Prochet is a candidate for a second half breakout. And honestly, Baltimore kind of needs him to be a second half breakout guy here, especially with, what happens if Duvernay goes down. Hopefully nothing does happen in that circumstance, but, something we kind of just have to keep an eye on here in terms of what the position could be. So Prochet, look, he has good hands, good route runner. He can be used in certain packages that I think can maximize his skill set. So in that group, I identify Prochet as the biggest guy to break out because Duvernay's done it. Duvernay, he's not a breakout candidate because he's already broken out. He has been successful. I'm not putting him in that category. I think in terms of a guy who could break out in the second part of the year, in the wide receiver room, at least my pick there is Prochet. But moving on to tight ends, I'm going to say Isaiah Likely. And he is kind of already on that trend right now. But my thing is more of when Mark Andrews comes back. Likely has shown that, look, when he can be the number one tight end in this offense with Mark Andrews out of the picture, he can dominate. He can go out there and make catches. We saw the flashes in the preseason, had a great preseason, great training camp and everything. But then once the regular season started, obviously Mark Andrews was the number one option in that room. Josh Oliver stepped up. So my thing is, I think Isaiah Likely can break out, but I think he can do it with Mark Andrews there. And I know a lot of people are looking forward to what those two can do when they're getting more of the snap shares together on the field. So Likely has already shown, you know what, I can do this thing when Mark Andrews is out. But what can you do when Mark Andrews is in? And you want Mark Andrews there, right? You want Mark Andrews on the field if you're Baltimore. But I think the room is so deep for the Ravens right now that, hey, look, you know what? It's a luxury that they can afford to have where they can, if they feel like, bring Likely along slowly. He's improved in the run blocking aspect, as we talked about with Kyle Barber yesterday on our rookie report. So highly recommend that episode. But I think Likely can break out in just being utilized more by Lamar Jackson. These last couple of weeks has given him more of a connection. Well, those two more of a connection with each other because, as I've said, it wasn't Lamar Jackson throwing to Isaiah Likely in the preseason. It was Tyler Huntley. It was Anthony Brown. So they're establishing that connection. So I put Likely there as a candidate who I think just has so much potential and can really start to break out consistently in the second part of the season. I'll put Charlie Kolar in the conversation too, although I expect him to be brought along more slowly. And the whole thing with the tight end room, and we'll talk about this more throughout the show, is that they don't necessarily have to bring him along super fast and say, hey, you got to play 95% of snaps here. That's just not going to happen in a room like this. So I think Likely for me is the tight end guy. Offensive line, you go left to right. Ronnie Stanley, he's all pro. Don't have to talk about him as a breakout candidate. Ben Powers has played really well. Tyler Linderbaum, Kevin Zeitler, Morgan Moses. I mean, I guess Morgan Moses out of all those guys would be like the breakout candidate because he hasn't been terrible, right? I think he's played okay. It hasn't been necessarily super spectacular, but it hasn't been a train wreck. I think he's been a solid option there. But with the way the other four are playing right now, if I had to pick a guy on the offensive line and say, hey, this guy's going to break out, I think it would be Morgan Moses. I mean, if Daniel Faalele has to step in and for extended action, maybe he can solidify a spot and just continue to build on his early season performances. But I mean, I guess out of those 5 guys, I would pick Morgan Moses. And then the quarterback, there's no Lamar Jackson has already broken out. He did that years ago, so we don't have to talk about him as that candidate. So those are my offensive guys for the Ravens breakout-wise. Coming up, though, we're going to dive into defense, talk about the defensive breakout candidates for Baltimore as they embark on the second half of their 2022 season journey. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to dive into here on the show. But first, this episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Turo. And Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want wherever you want it from a community of local hosts across the U.S., UK, Canada, and coming soon to Australia. You can book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. And you can also get a classic or luxury car for a special event, such as a birthday or even a holiday. Find an affordable economy car if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B, or test drive the new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. So terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher still with you here on this fine Wednesday here on November 16th. And we talked about offensive breakout candidates for Baltimore second half of their season here in 2022. We're flipping the field, talking about some defensive guys now. So we'll start on that defensive line. Baltimore, I think, has seen some guys break out already. Justin Madubuike has had a phenomenal year. Broderick Washington is really, really coming into his own. And I don't want to put Washington in necessarily the breakout category. I think he's already kind of doing that right now. But I guess if you just want like the ultimate Broderick Washington breakout, I could see it, but I'm going to put Travis Jones in this category. Jones, we heard the training camp hype. We saw the preseason hype for him. Got injured in the preseason, though, so that was an unfortunate blow for the Ravens overall. But I think what you're looking at here is a guy who had to work back from that injury. But the Ravens' defensive line being so deep right now with Calais Campbell and Brent Urban and Madubuike and Washington and all these guys, they haven't necessarily needed to put Travis Jones in this. Yeah, you're playing 100% of snaps. You have to go out there. Now, Jones is a big guy, and he's super talented, obviously an interior pass rusher, good against the run as well. He is a very versatile option. And I think as this season goes on a little bit, maybe Baltimore wants to manage some snaps of Calais Campbell or Brent Urban. They want to employ different packages here and there. And Jones, I think, has the talent to get on the field regardless of whether they want to do that or not. But in terms of a guy who, look, this year he's only totaled 10 tackles. He does have a sack on the season. But I do think there could be a second half Travis Jones breakout on the horizon, especially when looking at what the Ravens have there. They can rotate guys in, they can rotate guys out. And I like Travis Jones a lot. I know we're probably going to be talking about him a lot in the offseason as a guy who's a second-year breakout candidate, especially when you're looking at what's the future of Brent Urban, what's the future of Calais Campbell, et cetera, et cetera. But for right now, I do think that Travis Jones can at least get some momentum under his belt in the second half of the season, even if the breakout doesn't necessarily entail like 7 sacks or something. I do think that he will have a better second half than he did in the first half. And not even saying he had a bad first half. He just hasn't gotten necessarily many opportunities here. Let's move on to outside linebackers. And I think that the number one guy when you talk about potential breakout candidate, the potential that Afeowe has is undeniable. Now, the production that he's had this season, I know, has disappointed a lot of people. Now, he was pegged as, we looked at him as a huge second-year breakout guy, the number one pass rusher at the time on this defense. He was going to be relied upon in so many different ways. And he's doing a lot. Like, I do think it's better for him if his ears are able to be pinned back. He's able to rush the passer, just, not really thinking about anything. The Ravens defense, I know, extremely taxing, extremely complicated and whatnot. And I think Owe, he's been fine, but I think compared to expectations, I would say it has been a disappointing year for him. I mean, at this point, you would expect him, maybe to have like 5 sacks or even 4 sacks, but on the year, just one of them this season. That's the same amount as Josh Bynes has, the same amount that Marlon Humphrey has, Marcus Peters, Travis Jones, we just talked about, Brandon Copeland, who's no longer on the roster here. So you were expecting a lot more out of him. Now, he hasn't gotten a very kind whistle. He's been held on a lot of plays. I don't understand why these holds aren't getting called on him, because they happen so often. You would expect that at least some of them will be caught, but literally like none of them are getting caught by these officials. So he has, I think, a lot of area to say, hey, look, in the second half of this season, he's going to be able to get a lot more opportunity. I think with the way Justin Houston's playing this season, the return of Tyus Bowser, you look at David Ojabo coming back, you already have Jason Pierre-Paul in the fold there as well and other guys. Yeah, I think that Owe has the potential to have more than just one more sack in the second half of the season here. And with the way that I think the season could go for him, I'm excited to see how it turns out. Hopefully it's also better for him. I think just for a confidence boost heading into his third year. He just wants to get the quarterback down, I think, and he's talented. And I think when you're talking about what a breakout player looks like, it's someone who maybe he's been in a little slump in the first part of the season, but then that second half, boom, it comes out and it's like this amazing thing. So I'm putting Noe in that category. I'll put Tyus Bowser here too. I mean, again, he's proven himself. Like, he doesn't have to break out in any way, but I do think he could break out in the second part of the season in terms of like just getting back to his old self. We saw him in the game against the Saints in Week 9 look like his old self. So I'm excited to see him. David Ojabo, I could also put in the same category, but almost like Charlie Kolar, the outside linebacker group is so deep right now where you don't necessarily have to put him in a huge role early on. I think Baltimore will work him in, ease him in. So I don't necessarily think the workload will be there for a huge breakout year, but maybe it is. And I think that's a guy you could definitely say, oh, look, rookie coming in. He's a guy who has a lot of potential, a lot of talent. So maybe he's in that conversation, but outside linebacker-wise, I put Owe there. Inside linebacker-wise, it is tough. They do acquire Roquan Smith. They have Patrick Queen, who is already breaking out, so I'm not going to put him in this category. I guess if I had to pick one, I'd go Malik Harrison. Harrison's actually played pretty well this season, but again, it's like where are the opportunities now that Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen are in the fold? I think he's still going to get them. Like, I don't think he's just going to be completely phased out of the defense, but I don't think, again, it's almost like the workload thing we just talked about. I don't think the workload is necessarily going to be there to say, oh, this guy's going to have 50 or 60 tackles in the second part of the season. You're going to have all those tackles eaten up by Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen in there. So maybe if the Ravens have an unfortunate injury situation and Harrison has to step in, he could be that guy there. But I do think if I had to pick one, you're not going to pick Roquan Smith as the breakout guy because he's already a star. Patrick Queen's breaking out right now. So, next guy up there is Malik Harrison for me. Corner-wise, it is a little difficult, right? Like, I think when you talk about breakout potential, you look to the nickel spot. Can Brandon Stevens break out? Can Pepe Williams break out? Can Jalen Armour-Davis do something? Those are the guys who I expect to have like the big breakout opportunities. If I had to pick one, I'm going to go Pepe Williams. Williams showed me a little bit early in the season here, has been picked on a little bit. It's been inconsistent, I'd say, with Pepe Williams. But, I mean, I think that he is a player that they can utilize in a bunch of different roles. He can play in the slot. He can play outside. He can play some safety. Now, where he's utilized every week does vary based off of matchups and based off of opponents. But I like the way he plays. He's a feisty player, super competitive. And that potential, it has flashed a couple times, and I'm excited about the potential that Pepe Williams does have here. But again, they've played Marlon Humphrey in the slot and the nickel here a little bit more. So where are those opportunities going to come? Do the Ravens trust him enough? Do the Ravens, or can the Ravens even trust a rookie enough in the second half of the season as they make their playoff push, try to put together some wins and string together those victories? I don't know if they feel comfortable enough to do that. They might have to in some situations. They might not have a choice. But I do think that my breakout pick would be Pepe Williams in that circumstance. Safety-wise, man, I mean, the obvious one would have been Geno Stone in week 1, but Geno Stone is balling out right now. He is playing such good football. I can't even put him as a breakout candidate because he is doing it right now. It's the same thing with Kyle Hamilton. Like, I don't want to put Kyle Hamilton in the category either because, like, he's doing it. I mean, if I had to pick one, I guess it would be Kyle Hamilton, but it almost seems unfair to put him in that category because he is starting to play really well. But maybe my argument here will be that he's going to continue that and take it to the next level. We saw the inconsistencies early on in the season this year. The Miami game is the big game people point to. He points to that one, took the accountability, and now he has come back here and is playing really well, is getting acclimated to the NFL game. But so my argument will be that he's going to continue the upward trend and play really well and give himself that confidence boost heading into his second season. And even, the back half of this first season for him, I think he's going to have a really successful second part of the year here. So there it is. There are the breakout candidates for Baltimore's 2022 second part of their season. Special teams wise, I mean, I guess I could. Okay, special teams wise, I'll say Jordan Stout. Stout he's been pretty good. Not necessarily superstar spectacular, but he has been pretty good. There have been some punts here and there. you wish maybe would have gone a bit farther, or the placement would have been a little bit better, or the bounce would have gone a certain different way. So I will say Jordan Stout has a better second half than he did the first half. So that would mean that he has a phenomenal second half of the season. I'm a believer in Jordan Stout. There was always going to be a level of, I think, a little bit of inconsistency when you move on from one of the greatest punters of all time into a rookie. So you have to take those expectations into account there. But yeah, so I'll go with Jordan Stout as my special teams breakout for Baltimore in 2022. Second half, part 2 of that year. But coming up here, we'll be diving into mailbag questions, talking about Justin Houston, how Baltimore can continue their momentum, and more. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to dive into here on the show. But first, this episode is sponsored by LinkedIn. And these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. And I've used LinkedIn for a ton of things throughout the course of my life. And it's super easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. You just add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. They have simple tools you can use, like screening questions, to make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience. You can quickly prioritize who you want to interview and who you want to hire. And it's important to finish the year strong, and the right team member can help you do that. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates who want to talk to you faster. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the #1 source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional sport and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all over at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. So visit the website today, use mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. We are back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you, rounding out a Wednesday edition of the show here. Number 853 for me consecutively Locked On Ravens episodes. So, I don't know, random number, but it's what it is, number 853. So I appreciate everybody who's been along for the ride here. But let's talk now mailbag questions. We have a couple of really good ones here. I do want to dive into all of them here today. Our first one comes from Steve Rudden, who's over with me at Ravens Wire. So big shout out to Steve. He asks, will Charlie Kolar make an impact now that he should be ready to play? And I kind of talked about it a little bit in the first segment. I think that when you're talking about Kolar, with how deep the Ravens tight end room is right now, I think a lot of people want to see Kolar on the field. But when everybody's healthy, where is he getting snaps, or who is he getting snaps over? Mark Andrews, obviously he's getting tight end 1 snaps. You're not putting Mark Andrews anywhere for Charlie Kolar. Josh Oliver's been the de facto number 2 guy for them so far this year. He's played really well. I don't see the Ravens necessarily putting Charlie Kolar in situations where he has to take the place of Josh Oliver. Isaiah Likely has been the number 3 guy essentially, outside of a couple games with Andrews down. They've kind of rotated in Oliver and Likely in those situations. But I think for what you're looking at, you even have Nick Boyle in this conversation. So I don't think Baltimore is going to necessarily need him in a ton of roles right now. That is for Kolar, but I don't know. It feels like there are certain packages they can use him in. They'll definitely want to get him on the field, and they can utilize him. He has been regarded as a baby Mark Andrews, so there is that. But yeah, highly touted guy. I think that there's a lot of potential for him, but I think this might just be more of a, hey, get up to speed year for him, or I guess second half of the year for him, where they don't necessarily need to say, hey, go out there and play for us in this huge, massive role that might be a bit over your head right now, which I think he can still step up in the big moment. Don't get me wrong there, but it might just be, look, there's so much talent in this tight end room. Kolar's coming back from an injury. He still has to get acclimated to the NFL game and whatnot. So I don't know. I think there is potential for Kolar to contribute this year. I just wouldn't expect so much from him in his first NFL year here. Next question here, it comes from JeffNode.0, who says, last week's win versus the Saints felt like the most complete game of the season. What do they need to do to maintain the balance on all 3 phases of the game? Side note, Giro has to get Duvernay more touches. Agree on the side note. Definitely agree on the side note there. Duvernay is too talented of a player to not have a ton of touches every game. You don't have to give him 20, but I do think that getting the ball in his hands, we see it whenever the ball's in Devin Duvernay's hands as a receiver, as a rusher, as a returner, good things happen. So there's that on the side note. But in terms of what Baltimore has to do, I mean, it comes down to them beating themselves or just having these little mistakes that we see. Like, they're so talented where they can overcome those mistakes in certain aspects that we've seen this season, right? Where they have just done one or two too many things, one or two too many penalties, one or two too many bad plays, bad execution, bad play calling, and it falls and the collapse just happens for them. So for me, offensively, I think definitely lean on the run game. I don't think this has to be a team that runs 50 or 60 times a game, but I think with a run heavy approach, you can feed that into the pass game and it can work. If you get the run game going, play action with Lamar Jackson, make him so much more dangerous. He'll be able to throw these. He's a great thrower. I mean, I say it time and I want to continue to drive that point home here. He is a great thrower, and I think that he will be able to do so much with his arm in the second part of the season here. But Baltimore should be a run-first team here. I think that is their true identity, and it's not an indictment on the passing game. It's not an indictment on the passing game whatsoever, but I do think that that's what they should do offensively. Defensively, discipline. It has to be discipline, being able to stop opposing offenses on third down. In the red zone, can they hold teams to field goals and not touchdowns? Those have been really successful. I mean, that's just, lay of the land, successful NFL football. You got to be able to hold your opponent out of the end zone. You got to be able to stop them on third down too, get your offense in turnovers. Turnovers are key. Got to be able to force turnovers and get the ball back to your offense. And then special teams wise, I mean, Justin Tucker is not going to miss many field goals or extra points, which is no mistakes, I guess, or limited, very limited mistakes for them. Tucker's, again, not going to miss stuff. Jordan Stout, can he put the ball in the opponent's 20-yard line, the opponent's 10-yard line instead of touchbacks, or can there not be a shanked punt on this situation here or there? So that's where I am. And then Nick Moore, I guess, is more of a long, no bad snaps, I'll say, for Nick Moore. So yeah, Nick Moore, long snapper, not going to be, I think special teams is fine, personally. So those are the three ways I think Baltimore can, or at least in all three phases, be or continue their trends there. And then next we have a question from Gunny Ravens who says, hey, KO, that Commanders win versus the Eagles had flashes of the Ravens style of football. What takeaways from that game do you think would be beneficial to a steadily progressing Ravens team? Keep up the great work. I appreciate that. I do. And yeah, the Eagles game was one, obviously, for those who don't know, the Eagles were undefeated. The Commanders go in there and just play a gritty game of football, just grind out a win against an undefeated team there. But the Eagles did not look like they were ready for that game. And I think what you can take away from what the Commanders did there was they fed their number one target. For the Commanders, it was Terry McLaurin. For the Ravens, that's obviously Mark Andrews. They trusted in the identity. They didn't necessarily force feed and unnecessarily force feed one guy. Like it wasn't like Terry McLaurin wasn't open and Taylor Heineke was just force feeding him. Terry McLaurin was getting open and Heineke was finding that. It's about being able to find those soft zones in the defenses. And then on defense, this was a defense that I don't think a lot, like the Commanders defense is good. Like they have talent there, but the Eagles offense coming into this game was a buzzsaw. They were humming. And the Commanders just stood up to him. It's almost like that true underdog story where people the Eagles are going to run away with this game. They're going to run the Commanders over. And all of a sudden the Commanders go in there and they put up an amazing performance. It's like the shades of the old Ravens. And I'm not saying it's not the new ones, but where Baltimore would, come in as underdogs and they like that. Then they go in and they beat a team even on the road, right? The Commanders game was on the road for them. And they do that. So I was impressed with that. So just being able to stay true to themselves, stay true to that identity, I think is a key thing that I took away from that game. And being able to get the ball into your star playmakers' hands is great. And being able to use the complementary weapons, like for the Commanders, it's Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson in the run game. You use Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. You have Logan Thomas there as a tight end. So spreading the ball out, using your offensive weapons, but also knowing, where your stars are and getting the ball in those guys' hands. So there's where I have on that game. Finally, last question here from Finley Halliday, who says, since Justin Houston returned from IR, the Ravens are 3-0 during his time out of the team. Baltimore lost twice. Do you think Houston's impact on the defense goes under the radar? I think it did. I don't think it does so much anymore. He's been so good for them this year. 8.5 sacks in 6 games, where I think everybody's now awakened to Justin Houston is still really, really, really good. And it was almost like the same thing that happened when he signed with Indianapolis in 2019, where he was coming off of the stint with the Chiefs, his very long stint, obviously, and people said, can he still do the stuff he did in Kansas City? Is he even still good? Is he washed up? And I think coming back to the Ravens, even when he signed with the Ravens, it was, oh, is he still good? He had 4.5 sacks in 2021, but he just has dipped into that fountain of youth, and he did it in a big way. And I think that people are now seeing how good Justin Houston is. They're appreciating what he does for this defense. I know I am. I'm a huge Justin Houston guy. I have been for years now. So I'm happy that he's getting the respect he deserves. He's been one of the few saviors of this Ravens defense, I would say, a group that has definitely settled in and settled down, but it's been due to the part of his play and his leadership. His off-the-field leadership is a huge part of this, too, that I think that part might be a bit underrated, but I think people also see how good of a leader he is, too. So I'm excited for Justin Houston. I don't think he's going to be slowing down here anytime soon, so I'm excited to see his second part of the year. That's all I have here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. Be sure, again, to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and follow along with us in audio form. When we get back here tomorrow, more Ravens content on the way here. Always Ravens content, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.